The first gap is the gap between what the Minister says is happening and what is actually happening. The Minister says that we're bringing our rules into alignment with other countries, and in particular Australia. But there's a critical difference. It lies in the space of non-regulated technologies and organisms. It's a tricky technical area where I've taken advice from experts. And those experts have told me that we would allow non-regulation of SDN2 processes where other countries, such as Australia, allow non-regulation of only SDN1 processes. That's site-directed nucleases. And although it sounds like precision engineering, that's only in comparison with the old mash-it-together techniques. The key point is that our rules would be much more permissive than Australia's, and indeed most countries' rules. Australia is in the process of changing its rules, but it is consulting with the public on them. In the meantime, our proposed rules are not aligned with Australia or with other countries. We are way out ahead. The second gap in this legislation, this proposed legislation, unlike Australia, is that there has been no public consultation. There has been targeted consultation that has been conducted primarily with those who stand to benefit from the legislation. To their credit, officials have turned to researchers to fill the gap. But it is clear from the published research that most New Zealanders feel the need for much more information about genetic technologies, and many have strongly nuanced views. One study showed that when it comes to gene editing and genetic modification, 11% of Māori and 12% of non-Māori were strongly supportive, and 33% of Māori and 23% of non-Māori leaned supportive. It might be easy to interpret that as showing a fair degree of support for the use of GMOs in gene editing. But when I contacted the authors of that study, they clarified that, quote, although the leaning supportive clusters, both Māori and non-Māori, had a quantitative score that leaned closer towards support for these new technologies, the open-ended responses found strong ambivalence, and that's their original emphasis there, especially among Māori, due to the uncertainty respondents felt about benefits and risks. For example, the qualitative responses of those in the Māori-leaning supportive cluster listed significantly more concerns than opportunities, with several apprehensions about unintended consequences, ethical breaches, and lack of adequate information to make considered opinions. I am not convinced that New Zealanders support the widespread use of GMOs and gene technologies. Of course they support medical applications, but as for wider uses, it's an open question, and one that the Minister has not grappled with. The third gap is the lack of any economic analysis beyond some hand-waving about possible benefits. There are no numbers in the regulatory impact statement as published. Any numbers that might have been there have been redacted. Worryingly, in the regulatory impact statement, officials say that there are, quote, unquantified costs to organic non-GMO primary producers. NZIER has quantified the possible costs. They estimate that the effect on our export might be in the order of $10 billion to $20 billion a year. It's not just the organic producers who will be affected. All New Zealand producers benefit from our clean green image, an image that will be irreparably damaged if we do not get this legislation right. The fourth gap is the exclusion of expertise. The regulator is required to set up a technical advisory committee, but that committee has no space for an ethicist. And while the regulator is also required to set up a Māori advisory committee, they are not required to consult that committee. Madam Speaker, I think that most of us in this House, like most New Zealanders, would support the use of GMO and gene editing techniques for medical applications. Indeed, Labour as a government was working towards updating our rules for exactly that purpose. But this bill goes far further. It doesn't just liberalise our rules around genetic engineering, it takes us out in advance of other countries. And it does so with no public consultation, no analysis of the impact on trade, no certain role for tangata whenua, no ethics input. There simply are too many gaps in this bill, Madam Speaker. Steve Abel.
Well, that's an interesting aspect from Deb, who covers a lot of flaws in the bill.
Yeah, she brings up a lot of complex issues, and it requires a little bit of understanding about how CRISPR works. So she's, by the way, again, like I said, this bill is not concerned about grabbing genes from one organism and then shoving them into another organism. She's talking about Deborah's talking about SDN1 and 2 processes. So in Australia, they currently have non-regulation of SDN1 processes, which is let's see. Biologists, please cringe in the chat. Basically, it involves breaking a bit of the gene and then allowing it to heal back over, and then grabbing kind of like the traits and the mutations that you want from that. And I know there's some biologist watching this probably going to go, wrong. And I'm like, I'm sorry. I'm not a biologist.
No, I'm not sure if Susie Wiles watches our show. Maybe someone needs to send this to her.
Probably my older sister is going to be like, Laura, that was cringe and wrong. And it's like, oh, well, shit, I'm sorry.
But does your sister watch?
Sometimes.
Good.
But yeah, so okay, here's my notes. Right. Let's get this right for the biologists. Okay. SDN1 produces a double-stranded break in the genome of an organism without the addition of foreign DNA. So that's SDN1. So Australia doesn't have, allows for non-regulation of that. Whereas this bill is going to also allow for the non-regulation of SDN2, which produces a double-stranded break. And while the break is prepared by the cell, a small nucleotide template that complementary to the target region is supplied, which is used by the cell to repair the break. So yeah, it's basically just a fancier version of version number 1. So yes, carrying on with the points, Deborah is right. Unlike in Australia, there has been no public consultation on this issue. Farmers that were surveyed by Farmers Weekly, the majority of them thought that, yeah, we'd like to be consulted on this, please. MB's like, nah, we're just going to go to select committee. The study that Dr. Deborah is referring to appears to be titled Identifying Māori Perspectives on Gene Editing in Aotearoa, New Zealand. I shoved a link for that in the chat if people want to read that. She also states that there is a lack of economic analysis, and this is true. There are no numbers in the regulatory impact statement as published, and I'll shove that in the chat now so people can have a read through it for themselves.
Yep.
I'm sorry, guys. There's a lot of points to go over because she made a lot of points. So she also said, Dr. Deborah also said that in the regulatory impact statement, officials say that there are unqualified costs to organic and non-GMO primary producers. This is also true. This can be found on page 6 of the impact statement.
Yeah.
Whew, okay, that was a lot of stuff, guys.